A tent stands in the snow. Nearby, a man holds an ice axe calmly, as if they will go home tomorrow. In another photo, two trains wait as a crew clears the track, with an open white slope beyond the station. In the third story, a family portrait becomes evidence, used to name people who can no longer answer. The first story begins not with a flight, but with strangers pulling a tin box from Arctic debris. Around them are a white island, stones, ice, and the remains of a camp where no one is left to call. Inside the box is film. Not a diary with final words, not a marked map, but damaged frames stained by time and salt. It was found 33 years after a balloon carrying 3 Swedes headed for the North Pole and disappeared. The strangest thing is that the photographs did not deepen the mystery. They stripped away its heroic haze. In the faded images are sledges, sacks, a heavy boat, a black tent on the ice, and exhausted-looking men. One of them, Niels Strindberg, carried the camera, trying to leave proof of the route through glass, chemicals, cold fingers, and deceptive light. The image becomes a belated field diary, silent, but showing how much weight they dragged along and how little room remained for error. In the summer of 1897, the plan looked daring, almost neat. Solomon André would not trudge over ice toward the pole. Instead, he meant to fly above it in a hydrogen balloon with the beautiful name Ornen. Below, guide ropes would trail. Trailing over ice and water, they would create resistance and, in theory, help steer the balloon. On paper, it looked like control. Damp, ice, and weight took over. The balloon drifted off course. Ropes vanished, gas leaked, and the romantic machine quickly aged. But the photos show no single terrible moment that makes everything clear. Only a chain of small concessions. Excess weight dropped. Then comes the admission. They cannot fly farther. The balloon is no longer an airship, but cloth and rigging on the ice. It was no heroic march, but a calculation. Every kilogram fighting each step. Sleds hauled over rough pack ice. They hauled sleds over rough, drifting pack ice. You aimed east and worked all day. By evening, the map seemed to laugh. This later surfaced in the damaged frames. Strindberg's photos aren't victory postcards. Men stand by the sleds, still unsure what to grab. The men seem to be figuring out which harness strap to grab. The ice is broken and dirty, with pressure ridges and dark seams of water. On the snowfield, the black tent meant shelter. Beside it, too much gear. Supplies, weapons, instruments, boat, crates, clothes, photo kit. The expedition carried all the ingenuity of the late 19th century, but the ice would not respect it. Strangely, cold helped the photographs survive. Cold slowed the emulsion's decay, but never stopped it. Damp, swings, and years in soil and ice left stains, scratches, gaps. So the recovered negatives had to be rescued, not merely developed. When the images emerged, they were not what mystery lovers expected. Decision followed decision. The balloon down, people walking, ice moving, supplies shrinking. The route became a bargain with weather and bodies. A troubling detail surfaced late. The frames held almost no freedom, just weight, cold, and hauling tomorrow what they hadn't abandoned today. When the camp on Kvitoya Island was found in 1930, there was no one left to rescue. Only records, items, and photographs. Only records, objects, and photographs remained, outlasting the men and their plans, and showing the disappearance held no fantastical secret. Simple survival math. The hydrogen balloon gave a few days of hope. Then the ground drifted, cracked, and gave way. That is why these images hit so hard. They do not shout. There is no final explanation in them. Only sledges on the ice, and faces still trying to work. Look closely, and the heroic flight breaks into details. Too much load, drift, false hopes, and over-trusted machines. The photo didn't solve the mystery. It gave the missing human scale. The next image is from elsewhere, but the mistake is similar. They thought they were waiting out bad weather, as real danger hung overhead. But the mistake is similar. People thought they were only waiting out bad weather, while the real danger hung above them. Story number 2 begins with 2 trains standing far too calmly. Dark cars are buried in snow, almost to the windows. Telegraph poles stick out of the white mush, and above Wellington Station hangs a steep slope. Without knowing the ending, it seems, the main disaster has already happened. The tracks are blocked, passengers are stranded, and the engines cannot move. But the troubling detail is not on the rails. It is higher up. The trains were placed beneath an open avalanche chute. The snow did not have to find a path. It already knew one. This is March 1910 in Washington's Cascades. For the railroad, it was costly, but temporary. For the mountain, a fixed target. People watched the snow ahead, not above. Railroad logic, then, was simple and harsh. If the track was buried, clear it. If the telegraph worked, coordinate. If passengers were freezing, keep steam up and wait. Long timber and stone snow sheds were already being built over the tracks. They took the blow themselves and let avalanches pass overhead. But a shed protected only the stretch it covered. Beyond that, everything trusted the terrain. At Wellington, the trains were not in a tunnel or shelter, but open beneath a white slope. While the blizzard raged, that seemed secondary. Everyone focused on opening the line, pushing the plow, keeping communications alive. The rotary plow looked like a marvel. A huge bladed wheel biting into drifts and throwing snow aside. But even a machine like that changed nothing. The railroad could cut a path through winter, not make the slope forget its snow. The turn did not come at the storm's peak, which makes it unsettling. After days of snow, it warmed and rained. The snowpack grew heavier. Dry, wind-packed layers may hold, but wet snow pulls downward as water seeps between them. Overnight and early on March 1st, water seeped between layers, turning the buried slope into a loaded slab. First, people could hear a dull thud, nothing like wheels or a working locomotive. Then snow, trees, and ice came down from above. It did not simply cover the tracks. It struck the trains from the side like a giant shovel, and the cars shifted. Built to haul hundreds of tons forward, the locomotives were helpless sideways. Within seconds, their waiting station became a trap. There was no time to get out. A stationary train in an avalanche path cannot choose the moment, maneuver, or escape the impact. After the disaster, people read the Wellington photographs differently, seeing not just drifts and tiny figures with shovels. They saw the exposed slope, the stopping point, and the missing protection where it was needed most. Dozens of passengers and railroad workers died. The mountain road debate shifted. Snow sheds, communications, schedules, and plows still mattered. But so did the terrain. Where could a train wait? And where did stopping itself become risky? Later, the old station was renamed and routes changed. The Cascade Line gradually left the worst spots. But the photo held a clue seen too late. Snow on the tracks, and the slope above. That slope over the tracks was a verdict. Next, danger moves from rail cars to a lab table as an ordinary family portrait. Story 3 opens with an almost domestic scene, but the home is already gone. On the expert's table lies a family portrait. Dark suit, calm face, an ordinary photo kept in a drawer or on a mantel. Beside it lies something harder to face, because it no longer resembles the person from the album. The court had to prove not a feeling, not a visual likeness, but a name. England, 1930s. The Buck Ruxton case. After the remains turned up, investigators faced a task with no room for error. Everyday coincidences fell short in court. Jurors needed proof it was him, and an ordinary portrait stopped being memory. And so, an ordinary portrait stops being a memory. It becomes a measuring instrument, not a folder decoration or a newspaper picture. Nose bridge, jaw, tooth position, forehead contour. Strange, even cold. Photography first spoke in court, almost like an expert. But that was how photography first began to speak in court, almost like an expert. The method looked impressive, but there was no trick to it. First, the skull had to be photographed at the portrait's angle. If the head in the family photo turned, so did the skull. If the face was photographed from above or below, they adjusted for it, then scaled the image until distances between anatomical landmarks matched. Then they locate the eye sockets, nasal opening, cheekbones, teeth, and jawline. Small-scale errors matter. It made another face nearly familiar. Early forensic photo superimposition was no trick, just rulers, light, and negatives. Professor John Glaister and anatomist James Brash worked with tools that seem crude today compared with digital software. Glass plates, an enlarger, transparencies, pencil lines. But the logic was modern. Matches had to be verifiable, not pretty. The most powerful moment came when the lines began to converge. Not all at once. At first, they looked like two gray images forced together. Then the eye understands. The skull's hollows sit where the portrait's eyes were. The nose matches the bone, and the chin stays centered. The teeth provide a hard reference, yet we must resist the image's spell. No photo can revive anyone or replace an investigation. It could strengthen an identification, rule out a mistaken theory, and explain anatomy to jurors without a long lecture. That was its power. Before, courts often took the expert's word. He saw, compared, concluded. Now jurors saw an image they could partly verify. The conclusion could be checked partly by eye. But sight deceives, so a good expert names the limits, the matches, and possible illusions. The Ruxton case is remembered for its grim facts, but for photography, it became a turning point for another reason. A private family picture entered the cold machinery of court, helping return names to the dead. Technology had not become all-powerful. This kept a photo from becoming a dangerous guess. Scale, angle, anatomy points, other evidence, and calm court explanation. In the 30s, that work seemed almost daring, because photography still carried the aura of simple testimony. The camera simply sees. But a forensic camera also has to calculate. That is why this portrait feels troubling. Private memory is turning into legal fact. From there, we leave laboratory light for the gray sky over a vast river, where the warning appeared in metal. Story number 4 begins with a line in an old photo. Easily mistaken for a flaw, as a giant steel bridge rises over the St. Lawrence. Trusses run into gray sky. Broad water below, workers shift high above. One beam looks off. Bent, but not dramatically. Not broken, but almost shy, as if metal got tired of staying straight. Before the disaster, they noticed, discussed, photographed it. It was photographed. And still, the decision to stop work came too late. The Quebec Bridge was supposed to prove what engineering could do. A vast cantilever span would cross the river where ordinary methods would not work. A cantilever bridge acts like two outstretched arms. The farther the arms grow from the shore supports, the heavier the root load. Iron geometry outside, weight, compression, precision inside. The main danger was not that the steel might tear apart. Often, the scarier failure is a compressed member losing stability. Picture a thin ruler squeezed from both ends. It holds, bows slightly, then resistance drops fast. Bridge compression members are much stronger, but the principle holds. If weight is underestimated, the span lengthens, or a part is already bent, the safety margin melts faster than it seems. On the Quebec Bridge, The structure's own weight was heavier than designers expected. Leadership was split by distance, and key decisions were no longer local. Decisions moved through letters and telegrams. Consultant Theodore Cooper worked from New York. That distance was not minor. It was part of the risk. Workers and engineers on site saw the lower cord deforming. It was not theory. It was steel before their eyes, no longer straight. Most painfully, the warning was already moving up the chain. The deformation was reported and debated as they asked whether the work could continue. They were asking whether they could keep going. But huge projects are hard to halt when pride, money, schedules, and distant bosses are involved. The order to stop the work came too late. In late August 1907, the bridge still stood, and that reassured people. If it had stood yesterday, people assumed it could stand today. That was false comfort. Unstable metal need not give long warning. First, there may have been a sharp bang. Then the steel trusses folded like a vast machine, not like falling stone. Each failed piece dragged the next. Above, workers watched the bridge slip from underfoot, with water below only the falls in. After the collapse, 75 people were dead. Investigators could not blame one bad piece of metal. The commission turned to the calculations. They examined the structure's weight, the shape of compressed members, decision-making, and why the site warning did not stop work in time. The Quebec Bridge was eventually completed, but the first collapse remained a harsh lesson. A neat drawing does not defeat reality. When a beam defies the drawing, check the drawing at once. That makes the bent member photograph so unsettling. Disaster hadn't struck. People crossed the trusses. The river ran calm below. The warning was in frame, but no decision had been made. Sometimes the clue isn't hidden, just quiet. Last, a line again becomes evidence, on a human face, not steel. Story 5 begins with a photograph easily missed among family papers. A woman faces the lens the way people did in 1930s family portraits. Calm, a little stern, not imagining this photo would end up in court. Later, it is placed on a lab table. The light is adjusted. In the negative, the familiar face turns into a diagram. Not crudely, but checked feature by feature. Eyeline, jawline, how the nose fit its bony base. In Buck Ruxton's case, family recognition wasn't enough. Proof had to hold up in court. Before lawyers, jurors, and doubt, a memory portrait found another life, asking the skull, match or not. What feels unsettling is not the technique. It is a photograph of someone still fully alive to loved ones, working when help is impossible. The case pulled many threads together. Photo superimposition stood alongside recovered remains, belongings, and the accused's medical knowledge. There were traces of movement and everyday details too. But the name still needed pinning down. In the 1930s, experts had no digital screen. There was no layer opacity slider, only hands and optics. Skull shot separately for the right turn, portrait enlarged to scale. At the right scale, the images were aligned so skeletal landmarks lined up with facial features. It sounded simple, but only in theory. A poor angle, hair over the forehead, nose shadows, and smiles can shift soft tissue, yet bone keeps stable geometry underneath. The expert is not after a pretty likeness, but points chance cannot fake. Eye sockets do not move, and teeth do not cooperate. When an image like that was shown in court, the effect was almost physical. Jurors saw not just testimony, but face and skull sharing one space. But this was where the method became dangerous, if handled carelessly. Because people want to see the familiar face they are told to look for. So a sound conclusion rests not on one impression, but on verified points. The eye sockets matched. The lower jaw's contour matched. The nose line did not conflict. The chin did not drift. If something failed to match, that had to be said too. In the Ruxton case, The photograph made the identification clear to the court, but it was no magic stamp. Its strength rested on other evidence. A private image could be translated into measurements. That was the turning point. Once relatives saw someone they knew, now a court saw a testable match. So this story of the portrait in the skull is not some ghoulish crime blotter trick. It is the moment photography lost its innocence. A family snapshot was no longer just memory. A newspaper reproduction no longer just illustration. A lab print no longer just an image. It could return a name, but only with scale, anatomy, and an honest admission of limits. In court, science's victory turned nameless remains into real people. That is the image's true weight. The face on paper did not save the person. It came too late, but it kept the name from disappearing. This portrait is one of the quietest. No crash, avalanche, or collapsed metal. Just converging lines that left little room for argument. Story 6 starts with a photo that looks safe. Northern Italy, a tight valley, dark, still water, and a concrete arch. So clean it looks lifted from a blueprint. Above the water stands Monte Toc, with a pale stripe across its gray-green flank. Not a crack or chasm, a white scratch. On the old postcard it could be a trail, snow in a gully, or a print flaw. The valley looks calm, but the Vaillant Dam still waits for water. Below, people live, buses run. Longarone's shops stay open. Above, they check the reservoir level, tables, and movement markers. It all seems controlled, until that pale stripe changes the landscape. It is no longer decoration on the mountain, but a reminder. This old slope was not a monolith. It had slid before. Monte Toc carried a troubling memory. Old slip surfaces inside the slope, layers of limestone and clay, and cracks water could enter. From outside, it simply looked like a mountain. Inside, it resembled a stack of heavy slabs, with wet, dirty grease in places between them. When the reservoir rose, water did more than press on the banks. It entered cracks and raised pressure in the rock's pores. That mattered. The higher the water pressure inside a crack, the less rock presses against rock. Friction weakens, and the slope can shift more easily. Then the level could be lowered, but nothing reset. Deep water drained slowly, while support at the slope's foot was already reduced. First millimeters, then centimeters, then alarming rates. But the dam was built as math's triumph. Blueprints promised strength. The arch truly was strong. The flaw lay nearby. They asked if the dam could hold water, but the mountain had another test. Late on the evening of October 9, 1963, that white scratch stopped being a line in a photograph. The slope began to move. Not a few stones, not a ledge collapsing, but hundreds of millions of cubic meters of rock, forest, and earth moving almost as one. From the valley, it was no ordinary rockfall. A low, heavy rumble, mountain losing shape, black mass hitting water. It hit the reservoir, and water with nowhere to go rose like a wall. Then came the dreadful twist. The dam held, but the wave cleared it and rushed down, toward people who should never have had to think about water overhead. In Longarone, some heard noise or saw white dust. Others only felt the blast before the water. Time was short. That evening, geology long tracked in charts became motion, sound, and blank space on the map. After Vaillant, people kept seeing the same photos differently. The valley, dam, water, and pale stripe on the mountain. That mark could once be overlooked. Nearly 2,000 deaths cannot be explained by one bad minute. Confidence in calculations was part of it. Also at play, a disputed ancient landslide reading, water level shifts, and seeing slow movement as monitoring, not disaster. Disasters didn't halt dam construction. Engineers learned to monitor reservoir slopes, sensors, geology, filling speed, old landslides, cracks in photos, and terrain oddities couldn't be dismissed as background. Vaillant terrifies because its main dam survived. The main structure held. The concrete proved strong. The assumptions around it did not. Sometimes a warning doesn't flash red. It's white on the mountain as everyone watches the water. Next, white marks workers' faces near a dark tunnel, not the slope. Story 7 starts at a dark tunnel entrance. Workers pose after a hard shift. Jackets rumpled, faces tired. A cap rides low over his eyes. White dust coats cheeks, collars, sleeves, lashes. Grime at first glance. They drill a mountain. Stone crumbles. Clothes get dirty. Nothing strange. West Virginia, early 30s. Work mattered. The Hawk's Nest Tunnel promises cash and speed. In the mountain, drills roar. Outside, crews wait as lamps catch faces in darkness. But the whiteness in that archival photo is not just a trace of work. It is almost a medical record made before the diagnosis. The dust wasn't grit you could cough up and forget. It was too fine, too specific in composition, reaching places surface grime should never go. They cut through rock rich in crystalline silica. Pale stone dust to the eye, but a different story for the lungs. A drill crushes quartz, lifting particles too small to settle. They hang in lamplight, enter mouth and nose, and pass deep into the airways. They enter the mouth and nose, reaching deep into the airways. Wet drilling can knock dust down. Proper ventilation and protection cut the risk. Dry drilling was faster, cheaper, easier in the race for meters. When speed paid and deadlines pressed, safety brakes became luxuries. Workers went into the tunnel without proper masks. Inside, the air turned milky. At shift's end, a worker stepped back outside. He shook his jacket, perhaps spat gray saliva. Thought tomorrow would repeat. No blast, no collapse. Trouble quietly built, breath by breath. Silicosis sounds like a disease that takes years. Here, it moved fast. Fine crystalline dust reached the lung's deepest parts. The body tried to clear it like an enemy, but lung-cleaning cells could not handle sharp quartz particles. Inflammation followed, then scarring. The lungs lost their softness, as if an invisible net were tightening inside. First came coughing, then breathlessness on a climb. Soon he could not work, though he had held a drill only recently. Then old photographs looked different. Not just fatigue, but missing protection. Dust thickly powdered their faces like flour. Near the entrance, the air that should have saved them carried the same white haze. The chain of contractors did its part, too. More links between the job and the worker with the drill made responsibility dissolve into paperwork. For a long time, the Hawk's Nest disaster was hard to count. Workers came and went. Many were poor migrants, and many were African American. Some deaths disappeared into small towns and hospital records. Still, there were hundreds of severe cases and deaths when hearings and investigations began. This detail became the main charge. They didn't just build a tunnel. They cut dangerous rock, drilled dry, rushed, and left workers unprotected. Unprotected, they breathed it every minute. Today, the shot at the portal seems impossible. White dust on skin where it never belonged. Back then, it looked like a normal shift. That is why the story grips us. Sometimes the evidence is not hidden. Medicine comes after the photograph. Next, a smaller signal. A tiny flame under wooden steps, long dismissed as a local nuisance. Story number 8 does not begin with a wall of fire. It begins with a small flame beneath an old wooden escalator. King's Cross. Commuters head home. Some rush. Others look down, thinking only of trains. Beneath the steps, light appears. Under the steps, a little flame appears. Unpleasant, but not a disaster. The underground had seen smoke, overheating, and small fires before. The response seemed clear. Stop the escalator. Call for help. Move people away. But one detail went unnoticed then. The fire wasn't in an open room, but in a sloped wooden channel, beneath steps packed for years with grease, dust, debris, and paper. Smoking was already banned, But people still dropped matches and cigarette butts. A small flame found a place where it could learn to run upward. Fire on a flat floor behaves one way. In a sloped gap, another. Later, this would be called the trench effect. The idea was simple, but unsettling. The flame hugged the sloped channel as hot gases rose, preheating surfaces ahead. The wood, grime, and old buildup were heated before open flame reached them. They were already being prepared to ignite. Outside, one blaze seemed confined below. In the escalator shaft, fire cut through King's Cross, a transfer hub. At King's Cross, crowds and tube bustle made early evacuation seem panicked. Too late, smoke gained ground. Here, common intuition breaks. The danger wasn't the first flame's size, but the space's shape. At some point, the fire was no longer something to bypass. Smoke thickened by the escalator as people above tried to trace it. Below, heat was already driving the reaction. Then flames shot upward, not a taller bonfire, but a superheated flow. Anyone at the exit saw it shoot from the sloped shaft into the ticket hall, making the familiar station strange in seconds. Yellow light, tiles, signs, stairs, all vanished in black smoke and heat. Passengers, staff, firefighters were inside. The fire came sooner than expected. 31 people died. For a big city, its ordinariness was especially terrifying. Before the disaster, the station was a route, not a hazard. No one chose risk, just the familiar underground way home. After King's Cross, the investigation forced the underground to link old materials, cleaning, training, and passenger habits system-wide. Wooden escalators began to be removed. Smoking rules became tougher and clearer, and crews cleaned more carefully beneath the escalators. They focused on spaces where trash had once seemed minor. Staff learned to call an evacuation sooner instead of waiting. No small fault was supposed to be left, until it became an obvious disaster. Crucially, the fire was found, but treated as familiar. It behaved according to rules not yet in the station's working memory. That early frame of the small flame is disturbing. The mechanism is shown at the start. Next, no smoke or escalator, just 3 quiet wedding photos, frightening only together. Story number 9 begins with 3 wedding portraits. Taken separately, each seems almost dull. A groom in a dark suit. The bride wears a pale dress, with a studio backdrop, a stiff collar, and faces trying to remain proper and still. In early 20th century England, there were thousands. Placed on mantels, mailed to relatives, hidden in boxes of letters. The groom's build and posture were too familiar. The coincidence too neat to ignore. Before digital databases and face searches existed. No shared button links the cities. Just registration books, newspaper notes, insurance papers, and people reading by eye. People read it all by eye. And so a wedding portrait becomes evidence, not because it shows crime, but because it suddenly isn't alone. George Joseph Smith knew how to vanish. Not like a man from a novel, but like someone from the age of paper. He changed names, cities, and explanations, and each time it looked like a separate family story. A woman gets married, a bathroom tragedy, water, a closed door, husband nearby. A doctor sees the aftermath, not the start. Bessie Mundy, Eli. Bessie Mundy, Alice Burnham, and Margaret Lofty lived apart. With no big case tying them together, the scheme endured. Only small entries scattered through different ledgers. But the pattern repeated. A quick marriage, money or insurance, a new husband's name. Then came an apparent accident and a financial trail. Police sought no genius puzzle, just a dull coincidence repeated too precisely. When the documents were finally compared, the case looked like a spread of cards. Investigator Arthur Neal saw no monster legend. He traced verifiable links, a signature, marriage registration, payout, and a newspaper note on a woman drowned in a bathtub. Another city, a very similar husband. Forensic pathologist Bernard Spilsbury faced a question that seemed strange only at first. Could someone drown in a bathtub with almost no struggle? In a narrow tub, a sudden loss of balance makes water a tool in a cramped space. For the court, one elegant theory was not enough. It needed a chain of links. The medical account came next. The portraits alone proved nothing, but showed police one repeated method, not three tragedies. In 1915, Smith's case reached the Old Bailey. It became famous, but beneath the newspaper noise, one thing mattered most. This was early behavior pattern work, before big databases. Matching surnames, aliases, places, dates, insurance, and medical details. Done by hand, errors could linger between cities until papers were compared, leaving the three wedding portraits strangely unsettling, even today. They look like the beginning of married life, but read like an investigation's end. No blood, no chase, no grand gesture. Only a suit, a dress, studio light, and a man too often in the same role. It is not about photographs always telling the truth. Truth sometimes appears only between photos. Next, another color. Brown smoke in the clinic, where the flames weren't the greatest danger. Story 10 starts with color, not flames. Cleveland Clinic photos show a pale facade, people by the entrance, fire escapes, white details. There are fire escapes, white coats, and windows breathing out a dark yellow-brown veil. Not the black column or bright inferno the eye expects. It was as if the building exhaled chemicals instead of burning. Inside, people collapsed one by one, many without burns. A doctor could help a patient in the corridor, then suddenly weaken. Outside, crowds sought fire. Inside, the answer was air. Here, the old hospital archive stops being a dull archive of films and folders. It becomes storage for a material that acts unlike paper when heated. Then, X-rays were often kept on nitrocellulose film, useful patient records for hospitals, but dangerously flammable celluloid. From a fire risk standpoint, it was in the same dangerous family as celluloid and some explosive compounds. Nitrocellulose hates heat. Once decomposition begins, it can move fast, releasing its own gases. The film seems too thin and neat to look like fuel. But in an enclosed room, stacks of film were another scale entirely. Heating released not just fire, but toxic nitrogen oxides. That gas irritated and damaged the airways. The color of the smoke was not a striking detail in a photograph, but a chemical warning. The building mattered too. With archives, vents, stairs, and corridors poorly connected, gas ignored the first film and followed any path. On May 15, 1929, the clinic took a blow that ordinary firefighting instincts were poorly suited to handle. Smoke and gas moved through the building faster than people could react. In corridors, a deadly zone did not require flames. One breath is enough. Nitrogen oxides are sneaky. Burn, cough, weakness, then lung damage. Sometimes later. Staff tried to pull patients out, but breathed the same air. Outside, firefighters saw windows, stairs, crowds, not the danger. This shapeless danger couldn't be moved by hooks or doused in one corner. It spread along building pathways, making photos almost unreal. We expect big flames to prove disaster. Here, the key substance dissolved in air, making each breath risky. After the Cleveland Clinic fire, the death toll rose past 120, a bitter number for a hospital. A place people came to be saved was made vulnerable by its own archive. And disasters like this changed storage rules. Dangerous film now required separate fire-resistant rooms, better separation, ventilation, temperature control, and much safer materials. Old X-ray archives could no longer be treated as simple medical storerooms. They were chemical sites inside a hospital. Look again at those photographs, and the strange brown smoke stops being background. It explains why people collapsed without burns. A small fire could bring mass death. Color mattered more than size, and the window showed air turned poison. Story number 11 begins with a window that is pleasant to look at. A shiny fuselage stands beside the boarding stairs. Along the side, a row of large, angular windows makes the future seem finally comfortable. Less noise, higher speed. This is jet passenger aviation's beginning. The de Havilland Comet, sold as more than a plane, a new post-war habit. It was a new habit of the wealthy post-war world. And that's the strange part. No smoke, no tilt, no visible crack. The warning was hidden in the machine's most beautiful part, the windows. And in every fuselage cutout, every rivet hole, wherever the smooth metal skin lost its smoothness, it didn't yet sound like a death sentence. The fuselage looked strong. The tests had been passed. Passengers smiled by the boarding stairs. But jet altitude brought stresses aviation was only learning to notice. One thing matters. On the ground, this airplane was just a beautiful aluminum tube with wings. In the sky, it became a pressure vessel. Outside was thin, freezing air. Inside, people needed to breathe almost normally. So each climb inflated the cabin, but not like a balloon, barely noticeable. Descending, pressure eased off the fuselage. Again and again, flight after flight, metal weakened without breaking. A tiny fatigue crack, almost invisible, could patiently grow with every cycle. The danger was where stress had to flow around an obstacle. Around a round hole, the load spreads more gently. At a corner, it bunches up, like a line at a narrow door. And nearby, rivets. Routine aircraft rivet holes and heads give the ad surface rhythm. After the crash, engineers see a chain of crack origins. Then came flights, after which no one could dismiss it as a rare malfunction. In January 1954, BOAC Flight 781, a comet, broke apart in midair over the Mediterranean after leaving Rome. There was no warning. At high altitude, a pressurized cabin rupture is sudden. Metal gives way, then pressure takes over. Then pressure does the rest, and the fuselage no longer holds an airplane's shape. A few months later, a similar disaster happened again. The aircraft were grounded, and the investigation led to a strange laboratory scene at Farnborough. An entire Comet fuselage was lowered into a water tank. Again and again, they put it through pressurization cycles. The water was not for show. It contained the breakup and revealed where metal first yielded. It flew with no sky. Then a crack marked the route. Cutout, corner, holes, ordinary assembly detail. Afterward, square windows became a convenient shorthand. But that was too simple. The comet was not brought down by one geometric quirk. The danger lay in the new altitude, pressurized cabin, pressure cycles, skin cutouts, rivet holes, and manufacturing. A harsh combination. Later, windows got softer rounded corners. The structure was strengthened, and pressure tests looked beyond one-time strength to thousands of flights, thousands of routine flights in a row. That was the key shift. A plane might pass today's test and still fail in the future. Day after day, it was stretched and released. That old boarding stair photo shows not just luxury, but physics they were still learning to read. The beautiful window was not the villain. It was a clue, noticed too late. Next, the warning hung not on aluminum, but above a street. Story number 12 begins with fog that looks too ordinary to fear. A small Pennsylvania town, wet streets, dark roofs, headlights pressing into a pale wall. From a window, it might seem like fall beside the river. But old Denora photographs show something wrong. Chimney smoke does not rise. It is flattened and smeared through the valley below the rooflines. The horizon vanished because the air stopped mixing. Factories kept running. People went out. Children watched the street. Drivers crept almost by feel. The first complaints didn't seem catastrophic. Coughing, burning eyes, chest heaviness. Doctors weren't solving the century's great mystery. Just seeing a line of sick people in bad weather. Later, the street became evidence. Denora lay in the Monongahela River Valley, as important as its smokestacks. Normally, warm, polluted air rises, and wind carries smoke away, giving the town a little fresh air. Here the trap worked in reverse. Cold, heavy air hugged the ground, with warmer air above. It became a lid. It's called a temperature inversion, but imagine a covered pot forgotten on the stove. Inside were streets and homes, along with people's lungs and emissions from steel and zinc production. The stacks kept releasing gases and particles, and the still air held them there. Sulfur compounds, dust, and fluorides all built up at ground level. The most unsettling part was that no one saw a single poisonous plume. There was no single black cloud to point to, just air that grew worse by the hour and stayed where people breathed. After several days, the fog was no longer weather. Visibility got so bad, cars crept along, doors open, so drivers could see the road's edge. Doctors and firefighters delivered oxygen, went house to house, and searched for people who could not reach help on their own. The elderly and people with heart or lung disease failed first. By late October 1948, about 20 died in Denora. Thousands fell ill. Here, the photo becomes a medical record. Gray street haze maps symptoms. Thicker air meant harder breathing. For homes lower in the valley, the danger stayed near the ground. Rain and shifting weather finally dispersed the smog, but relief came late. It was no solution. The town saw that factory smoke could kill not only near the stack, and not right away. After Denora, health officials could no longer treat such fog as an everyday nuisance. Investigations began, and families were interviewed. Addresses, illnesses, and weather were compared. The question was not only how much smoke the plant released, but what the landscape did with it. The valley, stagnant air, and inversion turned the town into a stuffy chamber, helping U.S. environmental medicine speak more forcefully. Air could be measured, emissions tied to symptoms, and street photos showed more than polished charts. The danger looked ordinary. It did not look like an explosion. It looked like an ordinary gray autumn, and people reacted too late because the fog seemed familiar. In the old Denora photograph, the smoke plumes do not rise. That alone is chilling. Next, the warning comes on an overcrowded riverboat deck. Story 13 begins with a photo. Disaster stands on deck, still pretending it's a homecoming. The Sultana waits by the bank. The Mississippi is bright, the sky calm, and people crowd every level. Not a few passengers, but a dark mass of overcoats and kepis. Union soldiers freed from prison camps survived war, sickness, hunger, and the wait for exchange. Now they need to get home. All they had left was to get home, so the photograph can look like a happy departure. River, steamboat, heading north at last. But linger on the image, and the mood changes. This boat was built for a much lighter load, and far fewer people. The clearest warning wasn't hidden in a dark corner. It was plain to see. Then, they called it a successful load. Behind that dense crowd was more than end-of-war haste. There was money and paperwork. The army paid to move people. Every soldier aboard meant money. Deals, requests, and bribery suspicions surrounded these flights. Some accusations would later stick, but the incentive was simple. Carry more people, and the trip paid more. The Sultana had another detail, less visible in the photo. Before departure, one boiler had sprung a leak. A full repair meant delay. Delay meant losing passengers, so they made a rushed patch. For a river steamboat, that was no small thing. A boiler holds steam under pressure, while water covers the hot metal inside. If boiler water uncovered part of the surface, metal overheated. When water returned, pressure could spike until iron gave way. After Memphis, people slept anywhere. Decks, passageways, shoulder to shoulder on bundles and blankets, as spring floods widened the river. Cold. After everything they had survived, home was close at last. which made the scene feel especially cruel.
On April 27, 1865, Sultana's boilers exploded. First a blast, then steam, fire, splinters, iron, and decks crashing down.
Those lying packed together seconds earlier found themselves amid smoke and boiling water, or in the dark Mississippi, many too weak to swim. Others had no idea where to go. The vessel burned, people screamed, and the current swept debris and bodies away. Even escape was crowded. With every plank occupied, no one could leave the deck quickly. The crowd of rescued soldiers in the photograph became a trap when the blast came. By various estimates, more than 1,000 people died. Many had already made it through Confederate camps and thought the worst was behind them. Later investigations examined the boiler repair, overloading, Captain James Cass Mason's actions, Army officials' role, and the transport system itself. Punishment proved far smaller than the catastrophe. The country had just endured Lincoln's assassination and the war's end. News kept piling up. In the nation's exhaustion, the river disaster faded. Sultana's last photograph matters because it does not reduce the cause to a spark or faulty bolt. A decision becomes weight. People become ledger lines, and technology and bureaucracy fail at the same point. Sultana pulled away. The Sultana left the bank with a warning already aboard: an overcrowded deck. Next, a palm-sized medicine vial with a neat label. Story number 14 begins with a bottle that looks entirely harmless. Amber glass, a clean white label, sitting on a pharmacy shelf. In warm light, it was no basement poison or suspicious unlabeled bottle, but medicine, with the pretty word elixir. In the 1930s, sulfanilamide was a breakthrough against bacteria, but tablets and powders were hard to give, especially to children. A liquid form seemed like a pleasant, simple, modern idea. Massengill decided to release it, while the danger stayed hidden. Even now, you'd scan the bottle photo for a skull, odd sediment, or bold warning. But the danger was dissolved inside, literally. To make the medicine liquid, they chose diethylene glycol, a sweet, convenient solvent human kidneys don't forgive. Today, the question sounds almost absurd. How could a medicine reach people without safety testing? But the law worked differently then. The old rules mainly targeted fakes, contamination, and false label claims. They gave regulators no real power to demand proof in advance. They couldn't require proof the drug was safe in this form. The company only tested taste, appearance, solubility, and stability. Far too little. Diethylene glycol smoothed the solution, but inside the body, it attacked the kidneys. At first, the illness just seemed severe. Then came pain, nausea, weakness, and sharply reduced urination. Doctors saw organ failure, unlike the normal course of infection. In a relative's hands, it looked like help. People trusted the pharmacy, doctor, label, even the word medicine. The law lagged behind. When the deaths were finally linked, the story became a race from address to address. Bottles had already spread across states. Inspectors pulled invoices, traced buyers, urged returns of bottles from home shelves, while doctors reported matching symptoms. It unfolded fast and horribly. Children and adults got infection medicine, but its solvent killed them. Over 100 died. For the U.S. drug regulator, the bitter truth was not only the death toll. Its legal foothold was the word elixir. Under the rules, elixir implied an alcohol base, which this drug lacked. The government could act because of a wrong word on the label. The dangerous formula got no proper pre-sale testing, which is chilling. The key evidence, however, was not the real reason. After this, technical explanations couldn't calm public outrage. In 1938, the U.S. passed the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. In 1938, the United States passed a new Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For medicines, it was a sharp turn. Safety now had to be proven before a drug reached the market, not discovered in hospital wards afterward. Sulfanilamide itself was not the real problem.
The problem was believing that a convenient form and neat packaging could replace testing. Clean shelf, straight label, modern drug, real medical hope. Yet inside may be a choice unchecked in time. And still, inside, there may be a choice no one checked in time. So elixir became the legal thread in the case. They drank it from a spoon. Next, the bottle becomes a tiny weld on a giant offshore platform's leg. Story number 15 begins not with a wave, but with a small piece of metal on a giant leg. On Alexander Kelland, massive columns, braces, and gray-green water below made everything seem overbuilt. Thick metal, huge piles. Everything here feels overbuilt. Fixed steel, massive welded joints, and plain industrial geometry. The platform housed workers near an oil field. After their shifts, they ate, rested, rode home, and watched television. A small equipment bracket was welded on. A secondary detail, not a support, column, or main element visitors notice. In the engineering photo, it seems like scrap beside the giant structure. There, metal began losing slowly, quietly, wave by wave. A semi-submersible platform isn't a stone house. It moves with the sea as waves lift, release, tug, and slightly bend the steel. A single cycle means nothing. Thousands upon thousands do. Fatigue cracks seek narrow stress zones, like a weld beside a bracket. That is especially true if the joint is poorly shaped, or inspection missed a defect. Cracks do not have to be wide. It can creep under paint, start at a weld edge, grow slowly, and seem harmless while the brace still carries load. That is the treachery of offshore structures. Danger is not always a storm wave. Sometimes it is normal service repeated too often. So NDT, ultrasound, magnetic methods, careful weld checks, is no luxury. It hears metal before it shouts. On a March evening in 1980, the D6 brace failed. Things moved quickly. One tube in such a structure can't stand alone. No structural part stands alone. Loads shifted, nearby members gave way, and one support lost its system connection. The platform abruptly took on a severe list. Inside, it was nothing like a ship's slow roll. Floors tilted, furniture slid, doors grew heavy, corridors became slanted shafts. Some sought rescue gear, others clutched handrails. Others were already realizing drills on a level deck were nothing like a real list. Lifeboats and exits proved vulnerable when they were needed most. The platform overturned. 123 died. 89 were rescued at sea. A tiny weld seam started the vast tilt. The investigation later returned to that small detail. The crack began near the weld around a hydrophone bracket on the brace. The secondary fitting gave metal fatigue a start. In fact, questions remained over design, inspections, safety margins, and rescue procedures. The accident showed that at sea, you cannot label any detail almost unimportant. If a small fitting changes stress in a large tube, it is structural. After the Alexander Kelland disaster, officials reviewed offshore inspections, welded joint rules, damaged structure stability, and evacuation in severe listing. People must be saved, not in a perfect drill, but when the deck has become a wall. In photographs, the white supports look invincible, but now the eye passes over them and searches for the tiny bracket. Sometimes the weakest point is too small to be taken seriously in time. Story number 16 begins like a photograph taken before a good day. People in hats on deck. Women in pale blouses clutching handbags. Someone turns toward shore, searching the crowd for familiar faces. The steamer has not yet entered the lake. The water is calm. The pier is nearby, the city very close. Seen after the disaster, the photograph takes on a strange unease. The hull seems not quite level in the water. The deck drifts sideways, not enough to panic anyone. The eye forgives it. For them, no sea adventure, just a day off, a picnic with music, food, and strolling, while Eastland waits near shore like a huge dark stage. They climb aboard, take their seats, and wave from the deck. The hull is already talking, but almost no one can read it. To understand the list, set aside the usual image of a shipwreck. No storm, no iceberg, no hole in the hull. The danger lay in weight distribution. A stable vessel, when it tilts, naturally tries to right itself. That requires a low center of gravity and a hull shape that provides restoring force. Engineers call it stability. Too much weight up high makes a ship like a person with a load overhead. Crowds, turns, or water inside work against its balance. That is when they start working against the ship's balance. The Eastland already had a troubling reputation, listing when passengers crowded one side. The new rules required lifeboats and rafts. Sensible, since people needed saving. But metal, wood, and hardware still added weight. That weight went up high, where every extra pound made the ship less forgiving. Below, there were also ballast tanks. Water in those tanks could help the balance, if handled precisely. If not, it became another passenger running inside the hull. On the pier, it was a normal morning. Tickets checked, people boarded, the band and food promised celebration. Then the tilt grew. At first, it seemed ordinary, like a sloping floor in an old house. Some edged toward the wall, others grabbed a rail. On ships, small things scale up fast. People shift instinctively. Tank water sloshes, and upper decks pull the same way. The force pushing it upright was no longer enough. The Eastland never got far. It rolled over by the shore. That was the horror. Land was close. Houses, mooring lines, faces on the quay. Inside the tilted hull, rescue felt impossibly far. Furniture and passengers slid. Windows became exits for some, traps for others. Stairs failed as the ship rolled sideways. When the ship rolled onto its side, some people were trapped in dark rooms below deck, where river water rushed in before anyone outside understood the danger. After that, the morning photo read differently. Not a family postcard, but a packed upper deck and tall life-saving stack. Then the hull itself, no longer looking steady. 844 people died, even though the steamer never made it out into the lake. For engineers, it was a harsh reminder. Safety can't be bolted on. A lifeboat saves only when its weight can't capsize the vessel. Ballast helps only if water aboard doesn't hurt stability. Rules help only when the whole system is judged. Not one good idea. Courts and inquiries debated blame. Captain, owners, inspections. But the photograph preserved a quieter piece of evidence. It does not show the disaster, but it shows the condition that made it possible. The crowd stood on deck, and the effort was almost lost. The next alarming detail was tiny beside the ship, almost a thread. Story number 17 looks almost too neat. Against the clean background sits a small medical device made of cream-colored plastic with a complicated shape. It looks partly like a shield, partly like an insect from a lab kit. From one side trails a thin, dark string. A handy little detail. A tail a doctor could use to check or remove the device. That is the trap. The key part doesn't stand out. Not sharp, rusty, or dirty. Just a thread. Early 70s birth control promised many women more freedom, less fear of unplanned pregnancy. The intrauterine device seemed like a modern solution. Placed once, it worked without daily pills. The brochures showed cleanliness and control. They conveyed medical certainty. Later, in court, the same photo was read differently. The tail's weave mattered, not the shield's shape. In the exam room, it could all sound reassuring. The device goes into the uterus, while a thin string hangs below. It could be found later. For patients, this wasn't engineering, but trust in a sterile medical product approved for sale. It seemed the major dangers had already been checked. But in the United States then, medical devices faced a less rigorous path than drugs. Until the mid-70s, regulations still had major gaps. Manufacturers could rush products to market, while serious questions sometimes came later. Thousands were placed before the Dalcon shield was pulled. Backers hard-sold its high reliability until its tail string failed. The problem was that it linked two environments the body normally tries to keep apart. Inside the uterus, special protection from infection is needed. Infection risk depends on the string. It exits through the cervix. Smooth and solid has one risk. Multifilament forms narrow channels inside. This is where the troubling physics begins. Simple enough to be convincing. A multifilament string is not a single smooth hair, but a tiny bundle. Microscopic gaps remain between the fibers. Fluid can climb through them on its own, with no pump. This is called capillary action. In court, it was often called wicking. Moisture travels through the material, and bacteria can move with it. Not an open pipe, but something subtler. The small channel was steady, warm, and in an unforgiving place. Women reported inflammation, pain, serious infections, and infertility. There were also cases of septic complications during pregnancy. The company pushed back, experts debated, and individual cases could have complex causes. But the braided string kept returning to the center of the debate. Advertising had shown it without alarm. Later, it helped explain how harm traveled. Once lawsuits multiplied, the small tail was no design detail. It put makers, doctors, regulators, and the whole concept on trial. A.H. Robbins faced an enormous number of claims, and eventually bankruptcy proceedings, after which payments to victims went through a special system. For many women, it was no abstract legal win, but years of pain, surgeries, letters, examinations, and attempts to prove their trauma. It was real. What stings is how clean it first looked. Cream plastic, plain backdrop, assured brochure, promised control. But devices in the body do not forgive tidy ad details. Material, shape, and the string's path can matter as much as the medical promise. The photo did not hide the tail. It just never explained what it could do. Next, the warning line becomes a roof above thousands of seats. Story 18 hangs over empty seats. Game over, fans leave, cleaners gather cups, and a dark line remains overhead. It is the edge of a vast roof, and it seems ordinary. Big buildings rarely look perfectly straight from below in the arena's yellow light. But within hours, that line will become the central question. Not why the roof fell, but why its shape had not stopped people sooner. Hartford, winter '78. Thousands had just packed the arena. Outside, wet snow fell, heavy, sticky, not fit for film. Inside, scoreboard, stands, post-game noise, street doors. No panicked crowd, no cracks overhead as the final shot went up. That's why the empty arena photo unsettles. It shows not the disaster, but its buildup. Still a slight sag in the metal. The roof was not just a set of beams. It was a space frame, a broad steel grid where many parts held one another. To an engineer, it was elegant, light, wide, with no forest of columns across the arena. Loads spread through joints like tension in a net. But an overconfident model can see an ideal system where real metal behaves more roughly. Joints have dimensions. Connections aren't magic. Elements can sit slightly out of alignment, and a compressed member does not like being forced to be stronger than it is. Back then, computer analysis sounded like a stamp from the future. The machine calculated it, so people trusted it. But a computer only repeats its input. If the model missed the frame or load, no beautiful printout secured bolts. The SAG said the real roof disputed the calculation. Through the night, snow kept pressing down. By itself, snow does not have to be a building killer. A good roof should carry expected winter loads. But if members are already at the limit, extra weight becomes the final argument. Compressed steel members may not snap like rope. They lose stability, move sideways, buckle, and the load immediately passes to their neighbors. Neighbors weren't ready either. A brief chain reaction followed. No fire, no blast. Around 4, Hartford Civic Center's roof collapsed. Imagine the sound. Not one blow, but a heavy folding of a vast metal system that had pretended to be calm for years. For years, it had pretended to be calm. Then beams dropped, decking caved in, and snow and debris fell into the arena bowl. During a game, it would be different. Empty seats changed nothing. Metal warned in its shape, and people called that acceptable. After the collapse, investigators looked beyond snow to decisions, calculations, checks, and why independent engineers missed the weakness. The reports cited the analytical model, underestimated forces, structural members losing stability, and observed deflection that could not be waved off as normal. That should have raised a serious question. This isn't anti-computer. Complex buildings need calculations. But calculations don't replace human judgment. He checks the metal, asks tough questions, has another engineer review it. The photo is oddly soft. Empty stands, light, silence. Above it was a line you wanted to straighten with your eyes. You couldn't. The roof showed paper certainty parting from real shape. The key detail stays quiet, sagging overhead. Next comes a cluttered scene. Rails, wires, and a red light, seemingly visible. Story number 19 begins not with impact, but with a small red point glowing above the tracks. Technically visible, as it should be. Rails wet from a London morning. Gray gantries, wires, masts, lamps, switches, bends. Now take the driver's seat. In the cab, the train has just left Paddington, entering one of Britain's most complex rail junctions, where lines split and cross. Signals were grouped together, each tied to its own track, with little time to read them. The red light stayed lit. It was simply surrounded by so many railway signs that the real question became what the driver had time to understand. The commuter train driver passed red signal SN 109. Two paths began converging where they could not meet. A railway signal seems simple from the platform. Red means stop, green means go. But inside the cab, the whole scene matters. Which mast carries the lamp? Which track it protects? Prior signal aspects? How quickly the view shifts? And the driver's local knowledge. At Ladbroke Grove, signal SN 109 sat on a crowded gantry. Already considered a problem after drivers passed it at red. It did not excuse the error. It warned of a system problem. If the same signal is repeatedly misread, examine people and the environment. The young driver had only recently been cleared to work alone. His training, route practice, and route knowledge checks later came under scrutiny. In the cab, no problem is solved in silence. He drives a heavy train, tracks instruments and speed, watches ahead, and filters noise. There is another troubling detail. Railroad safety cannot rest on the assumption that a person will always notice the right light. Fatigue, inexperience, visual clutter, similar signals, and brief doubt could be deadly. Britain's warnings didn't always force trains to stop. But they did not always force a train to stop after it passed a red signal. A driver could acknowledge the warning and keep moving. Stronger automatic protection was not everywhere, or on every route. The red signal, read by a person, stayed the last barrier in a cluttered scene. The commuter train entered the oncoming express's path. Inside, it was still normal. Newspapers, windows, thoughts of work. Outside, the rails had already brought two trains to one point. The railroad stopped being a schedule and became geometry, where error took space. The collision at Ladbroke Grove was brutal. Metal drove into metal, a fire broke out, and in seconds, the passengers lost their morning. 31 people died, and many were badly injured. But the later investigation refused to reduce it to an inattentive driver. Lord Cullen's report and other reviews examined signaling, visibility, driver training, risk management, and automatic train protection. After disasters like that, railroads change not just instructions, but the philosophy of barriers. If a signal is hard to read, The barrier must change. It has to be moved, highlighted, and backed up by protection. If a new train driver faces that stretch alone, question the training. The red light in the photograph was no secret. It was there, making the image more unsettling. Danger does not always hide in darkness. There's too much noise. In the next story, it turns resort-like. Lights, families, transparent walls, and almost festive material. Story 20 starts like a travel ad. Seaside resort, evening light, families with kids, a large building. It was meant to feel cheerful and modern. Summerland, in Douglas on the Isle of Man, was no stone theater or gloomy hall. Transparent, almost summery in design, amber panels caught light, promising pools, games, cafes, music, and covered walks. That was the promise when seaside weather turned bad. The dangerous detail was not hidden in a basement. It was on the facade. Plastic panels looked harmless. Viewers saw celebration, warmth, color, air. But fire judges material. Modernity means nothing. It does not care how modern a wall looks. Only whether it burns, melts, makes smoke, and hidden voids let flames outrun people. Early 70s architecture prized lightness. Less heavy masonry, more panels, daylight, and spacious interiors for a resort complex. For a resort complex, that sounded ideal. People came to relax, not to feel trapped in a bunker. But in a fire, a public building must be honest. Slow the flames, mark exits, and tell people to leave, fast. At Summerland, Oraglass-type acrylic panels could ignite and melt, while cladding and voids let flames climb. Large open spaces and passageways gave smoke a route to people, and the warning and evacuation systems were not quick or clear enough. One evening in August 1973, a small fire started outside, beside a section of the complex near a kiosk. At first, it did not look catastrophic. The disaster grew not from the spark's size, but from what it met. Once the fire reached material it could feed on, the pace changed. The plastic was not a passive outer wall. It could burn, soften, and drip flaming beads, opening new areas to fire. Voids behind cladding became hidden corridors. Outside, one fire was still visible. Inside, smoke and heat were already filling the building, endangering vacationers. They had not come for an evacuation drill. They had kids, ice cream, bags, tickets, and the fatigue of a beach day, whether it is serious. If music is playing, staff are unsure, and the exit is not obvious, people lose precious time. Escape routes should be simple as a pointing gesture. That way, now, no doubt. At Summerland, some were confusing. Some routes were confusing, jammed, or unavailable when needed, as flames raced up the facade before evacuation could organize. The Summerland fire took 50 lives. That number is hard to square with the innocent, almost pre-war-looking photos of the resort pavilion. Transparent walls, evening light, children at the entrance. This is why they matter. A public building's danger often isn't one malicious act. Instead, it comes from a chain of decisions. The facade material, the empty space behind it, who sounds the alarm, and when. Whether people know where to run, whether the exit that looks like salvation on paper is open. Afterward, Summerland became a painful lesson. In crowded leisure spaces, beauty needn't be dangerous, unless combustible cladding and confusing exits turn celebration into disaster. The celebration depends on one tiny spark. In old photos, the transparent wall still glows soft amber. Now it reads differently. Story 21 opens on an almost reassuring image. The Italian Alps, summer 1985. A green valley. Below lie a valley, white houses, hotels, and a creekside road. Higher above Stava, two flat gray rectangles. From the air, they look like neat terraces. Two utility ponds someone forgot to paint a normal color. No fire, no collapse. Just two flat spots beside the Prestivel mine. And that's what's unsettling. A minor industrial detail above the village. No scale figure, No danger sign, no red line. To tailings dam experts, the photo raises a troubling question. Why is so much wet gray mass sitting above a living valley, as if held not by a structure, but by habit? Below, vacationers opened windows to a mountain stream. Above, not a scenic pond, but flour-fine ore tailings mixed with water. A tailings impoundment is easy to mistake for a pond, but that is an optical illusion. In a pond, the basin and water matter. What matters is the slurry, the dam, drainage, and its buildup. After the valuable mineral is extracted, the waste remains. It is pumped through pipes as slurry. Particles settle, water has to drain, and the embankment is raised step by step. In upstream construction, embankments rest not just on firm ground, but on old deposits, often loose and wet. Danger lies below. The real danger sits between the grains. Water inside pushes on them, cuts friction, and solid ground turns thick and fluid. So the gray terraces in the photograph were not just a color. They signaled a heavy suspension above the village. Pipes, slopes, checks, and honest measurements kept it stable. Poor drainage meant internal pressure, not dry soil. On July 19th, that calm ended very quickly. The upper dam lost stability, nothing like a slow leak in a garden pond. First, the edge shifted. Then the entire wet mass found a way out. It slammed into the lower basin. But that basin was not a backup wall, just another fragile part of the system. The lower dam failed. A surge of tailings, water, rocks, and debris rushed into the valley, through streets, gardens, hotel courtyards, and a bridge. Someone below might hear a dull, growing roar, and not yet understand it was not thunder or an ordinary flood. Within minutes, the gray pads from the aerial photo became an avalanche of mud, and the white houses were in its path. Fine particles hold water. Water pulls particles along, and unlike loose scree, the dense flow keeps moving down slope and valley. 268 people died. Later would come investigations, reports, trials, and the memory of the Stava Valley. It was no mountain fluke, but an industrial site needing monitoring, drainage, calculations, and authority to stop at warnings. A tailings dam must speak through gauges well before it roars. Water level, pore pressure, slope condition. The quality of each added layer sounded boring too, until the first collapse. After Stava, tailings ponds were viewed differently. They were no longer a remote service yard for a mine, but a structure lives depended on down the slope. In old photographs, the two gray basins look almost geometrically beautiful. That is the trap. Risk rarely looks like risk. Once a bulldozer has smoothed it and a camera has pulled back, risk becomes easy to dismiss. Next comes a hand-sized warning. Story 22 starts not with a crack across the wall, but with a wet spot on a new earthen dam in Idaho. It sits low on the slope. Pickup trucks are nearby. People look up, trying to figure out where the water is coming from. From afar, this earth mass seems invincible against a trickle. But with the reservoir's first fill, water rises behind it. For the first time, it tests what design, rock, clay, and fill zone seems hid, as rural life continues downstream. Fields, roads, and homes sit below, where no one should watch the dam every minute. Yet the dark stain changes the picture. It stands, but muddy water at its base says something inside moves where it shouldn't. Outside, almost nothing shows. An earthen dam does not work like a concrete wall. Its strength lies in layers. A dense core holds back water. Coarser material on the sides gives it weight and stability. Drains and filters let water out without carrying soil away. Internal erosion starts as water finds a path, a crack, loose fill, or bedrock contact, then carries fine particles away. Then it carries off fine particles. The channel widens, the flow strengthens, and more soil leaves. Engineers call this piping. The term sounds too mild for a process that can eat away inside a dam. Engineers look beyond the wet spot to the water's color. If it's muddy, it's carrying out the dam itself, not water, but soil. On first filling, full pressure leaves no room to fake health. That day they fought what they saw. Equipment reached the wet spot. Rock was hauled to the slope, hoping weight would stop erosion. Heavy material might press the leak shut and stop erosion. At first, that seems reasonable. There's a hole, so fill it. Inside, another geometry was at work. Water ignored the surface, carving its own channel wider with each load washed out. Outside, it appeared as an ever muddier stream and cave-ins. Then the slope began to slump. The small mark became a wound. Through that wound, you could see the wall losing itself. Imagine standing below. A mountain of fill, and a dark mouth opens. The flow kept growing. Once the breach opened, the reservoir poured into the valley. The earthen wall was no longer a wall. Downstream warnings saved many lives. But the valley still took hits. Homes, bridges, farms, livestock, and roads. 11 dead. Damage counted for years. After Teton, engineers kept returning to dull basics. Foundation geology, rock cracks, filters, first fill control, independent review. An earth dam can't merely look good, not when water inside it has found a bypass. That small dark mark in the photo matters because it does not look catastrophic. It looked like wet ground after rain, something a bucket could cover. But in the dam's language, muddy leakage meant it was washing out. It was already being washed out. Next comes another engineering trap. Danger hidden not in water, but in a neatly routed wire. Story number 23 looks strangely quiet if you expect disaster on screen. No sparks, no flames, no torn metal. It was a cramped South London signal cabinet. Relays, wire bundles, neat technical clutter. And one extra wire that proved crucial. That wire gave a train a green signal where no safe route remained. On wet rails, commuter trains streamed toward London that December morning. Trains ran close together. Inside the cars, people read newspapers, briefcases on their laps, staring through fogged windows. If the train moves, the system knows. Engineers read signals, not rails. Green means go. Green meant go. Red meant stop. Most troubling, Clapham's danger started where checks and rules should have been strictest. Railroad signaling is built on a hard idea. If something breaks, the system must default to a stop, not an all clear. Loss of power, a broken contact, a relay failing to set. Better to show red and delay trains than create false confidence. It's fail-safe behavior, but it relies on diagrams, wire labels, sign-offs, rested people, and tedious connection checks. That meant tedious checks of every connection. Before the Clapham crash, signal upgrades required old wires to be removed or insulated. The new wires had to be connected, so no relay could receive a false command. On paper, it was routine procedure. In that cramped cabinet, dozens of similar wires, awkward posture, night shifts, and fatigue made tidy work deceptively reassuring. The wire left behind did not look sinister. It did not spark, hang in the way, or call attention to itself. It stayed where it should not operate. Then, at the crucial moment, fed power around normal signaling logic. A relay received a deceptive signal. The whole system then spoke in the wrong voice. The signal gave permission, though the track ahead was not clear. In a dangerous failure, equipment fails by permitting movement instead of stopping it. The green light ordered the driver to trust the track. The train moved ahead, caught up to another train, and moments later, another electric commuter train entered the tight rail corridor. Metal hit metal. Briefcases, newspapers, wet coats were caught in an event born not of speed, but unfinished work in a cabinet. 35 died. Hundreds were injured. Later, Investigators probed the wire and the work culture around it. Overwork, training, oversight, acceptance tests, and old system thinking mattered. The disaster wasn't one wrong move. The extra wire became the final visible link. A tired worker inside a complex system that failed to expose the mistake sooner. After Clapham, the railway learned a hard lesson. Independent checks matter, and safety cannot live in an installer's memory. The cabinet looks almost sterile. Neat rows, clean contacts, no panic. That's why this image grips you. Danger does not always stick out. It lies in an order no one questioned. Next, a road whose shine looked like routine upkeep. Story 24 starts with a shine that could pass for order in a small town. In Times Beach, the dirt road raises less dust. A tanker has passed over it, leaving a wet, dark strip. To residents, it is no chemical mystery. It is a service. Dust no longer blows into windows. Cars don't throw clouds by houses, and children don't come home gray up to the knees. In Missouri, it seemed like routine maintenance. Used oil sprayed on the road, holding loose dust down. The picture looks ordinary. Mailboxes, summer air, oil-slick road. Only later that shine read as a chains trace, not upkeep. Industrial waste, haulers, shortcuts, and lax oversight met by homes. Worst of all, it looks normal. Used oil suppressed dust because it was sticky and cheap. But it turns dangerous when no one knows what's in the barrel. In that chain was chemical manufacturing waste, contaminated with highly persistent dioxin. The frightening acronym was not the point. The point was how it behaved. Dioxin is not ordinary dirt that a hard rain washes away. It lingers and clings to soil. It binds to organic dust and can remain for years where no one expects it. Even tiny amounts can disrupt the body. It harms the body not like skin-burning acid, but as a lasting toxin. The road's oily film helped briefly. It knocked down the dust, yes, but it also locked something into the road that never should have left a controlled site. The problem surfaced slowly and unevenly. Animals got sick after sites were sprayed, and soil samples were taken in one place, then another. The paperwork on the waste's origin seemed too important for a routine road service. Then the flood came into Times Beach, spreading mud. Mud filled yards and homes. Already tested for dioxin, the town faced two disasters. The water had to recede. People return. They dried carpets, washed walls, reopened shops. Lasting toxins in mud made return a medical and political decision. Inspectors took samples. Officials argued over the risk. And residents wondered whether they could live where their street had been only yesterday. In hindsight, the streak became a contamination map. The city began disappearing by decision, not blast. No sweeping up and moving on. Times Beach was bought out. Residents relocated. Homes demolished. And then the contaminated soil was treated and destroyed for years under supervision. The town's name entered the national conversation about waste that does not disappear simply by being poured into another tankard. For the federal Superfund program, this was not an abstract case, but a whole town where every street was someone's familiar way home. Not some distant lab, but paid spraying from a truck. A dark sheen on dust. Pollutants persist beyond human memory. Persistent pollutants are dangerous because documents change, drivers leave, smells fade, but molecules stay buried in the soil. It showed industrial waste can enter a city as a convenience. Next, an ordinary decoration above a dance floor becomes another belated clue. Story 25 starts overhead, under a low Natchez dance hall ceiling. Not in wires, the doorway, or the stove. There, gray Spanish moss hangs, a soft local touch that could make a 1940 Southern club feel almost festive. Down below, it was packed. Walter Barnes's orchestra played while people danced, talked, and tried to shake off a hard week. Later newspaper photos would be stark black and white. But before the fire, that ceiling looked decorative, not like evidence. That is the hook. The mood-setting object would later be hunted for in nearly every account of the tragedy. Because fire safety often starts not with an extinguisher, but by asking what hangs, stands, and blocks the way where people gather. Spanish moss on its own seems light, almost airy. But dry plant fiber beneath a ceiling is fuel, not romance. By the common account, it was also treated against insects, and that may have made it even more dangerous. Now add a low room, a packed crowd, dark or covered windows, limited exits, and doors that slow escape. Before modern codes, habit ruled. If a celebration fit, the room was fine. Fire disagreed. It does not care about music or receipts, only dry fibers, airflow, ceiling height, and seconds to find an exit. How many seconds people need to find an exit? Before the first spark, crowding looks like popularity. Once the fire appeared, the room did not take long to change. Flames caught the decorations and moved overhead. From above, the worst possible place. In a crowd, a person may not see the source at first. He feels heat, sees the light shift, and hears voices around him change. The music cuts out. People move toward the exit, but all at once. Smoke drops, and the ceiling becomes a line of fire. Windows that might have saved people offer no easy way out. The door can no longer handle the pressure. In those minutes, people die not only from flames, but from smoke, crush, bad design, and panic. More than 200 people did not leave the club alive. Gray moss became not decoration, but an accelerant. After the fire, Natchez was described as a night when celebration had been turned into a trap in advance. And the key word is in advance. Before the first spark, the flammable decor and overcrowded room were already there. Doors must swing toward the exit. Windows cannot become decoration. And occupancy in the hall cannot be guessed. It keeps a beautiful detail from becoming evidence. The black and white photo of the low ceiling, gray with moss, seems old and distant. The question is modern. If everyone exits at once, what stops them? Sometimes danger hangs above the dance floor. Story 26 begins not with a bridge or a pile of train cars, but with a detail easily mistaken for a scratch. On the steel rim of a high-speed train wheel, a hairline crack runs, nearly invisible as a hair on cold metal. Passengers read, chat, watch green fields outside. Nothing suggests the system is already failing. This is Ice 8. Ice 884. A fast, familiar, assured morning run. On trains like these, danger is especially deceptive. Too much order. Clean cabin, smooth ride, schedules, signs, instructions. Below, a wheel makes thousands of turns. Thousands of times, it absorbs tiny shocks from the weight. The point is simple. A wheel does not have to fail all at once. Metal endures, then tires, and an old microcrack starts to grow. Outside, a train. Inside, the countdown. This wheel had a special design. Not a simple solid disc of metal, but a wheel with an outer steel tire and a resilient layer. A quieter, smoother ride sounds sensible. High-speed trains should be comfortable, not just fast. But ideas need honest testing. The outer tire bears huge loads, heats, cools, and takes hits from rail joints and uneven track. An internal fatigue crack can hide. Hidden flaws may not show. You need non-destructive tests, ultrasound, magnetic checks, strict inspections. That's the concern. An inspection may show the part still looks acceptable, yet miss where the metal had already begun to split. Not because someone pushed an evil button. Safety often stands at probability's edge. A small crack stays silent until the train speeds up. And silence ends fast. When the rim finally split, it was not some clean, instant explosion. A piece of metal tore loose and hammered the train from below. Passengers might hear a dull thud, feel a strange vibration. But in seconds, no one could know what happened beneath the car. The wheel fragment punched through the floor, damaged the running gear, and the train kept racing toward the worst point. A switch. Bad geometry is unforgiving. Wheel, axle, rail, and travel direction must align with unseen precision. The damaged bogie reaches the switch, and the track suddenly stops being one clear line. The cars begin moving the wrong way. Nearby, like a bad coincidence, stands a concrete overpass. It didn't break the wheel. It gave the initial accident a second force. Then comes the brutal, unthinkable part. Front cars pass, others derail. The train folds, metal snags the supports. Metal catches the supports, and the overpass collapses across the track. For a high-speed train, it is like a wall appearing from nowhere. At Eschede, it wasn't one cause, but a chain. Wheel design, metal fatigue, checks, speed, switch, bridge. Remove one link, and the outcome could have changed. After that, those wheels and inspections were no longer engineering conveniences. The investigation forced a new look at fatigue, monitoring, and everything built beside the tracks. Because infrastructure is not just background. Sometimes it magnifies a mistake into a catastrophe. The small crack was seen too late, and the train met it at full speed. This story is also about a white surface people saw firsthand, where danger hid not in metal, but in empty Antarctic light. Story 27 begins with an almost empty photo. Oval porthole, white surface, gray sky, soft light on glass. A passenger snaps a photo over Antarctica, a rare lucky break. On the sightseeing flight, people expect views, not alarm. Ice, mountains, a volcano, the edge of the world outside the window. Air New Zealand Flight 901 feels almost festive, seeing Antarctica from a comfortable seat. The last frames recovered after the crash are frighteningly simple. The white expanse was neither cloud nor distant plain. It was the slope of Erebus. The vast volcano blended into the sky so completely your eyes gave no warning. Danger was in frame, yet it looked empty. In polar regions, vision can fail. Whiteout occurs when snow, clouds, and diffuse light erase all shadows. The horizon vanishes. The slope becomes a smooth, white wall of light. Distance is unreadable. Not darkness, but overwhelming brightness. It's bright, so the brain calms. Missing one key thing: shape. Now add the route. Pre-flight nav data was corrected. Investigation suggests the crew may not have clearly understood that the actual flight path differed from the one expected from old charts. The aircraft flew below the clouds so passengers could see the continent. That alone was not a reckless stunt. Sightseeing flights were about the view, but when the view becomes a white sheet, trust shifts to instruments and coordinates. And if that chain is misaligned, your eyes cannot save you. Outside, passengers were still taking pictures. That is especially hard to accept. The cabin may have felt like any quiet sightseeing flight. Camera shutters, people by the windows, voices lowered. And the aircraft was already flying toward what was not distant scenery, but a mountain. In those years, ground proximity warning systems were not the all-seeing protectors we imagine today. The crew had only seconds left. When instruments and sight disagree, the mind needs time to accept the worse version. Near the ground, there's almost none. Erebus did not emerge from the darkness like a black cliff. It was hidden in its own snow. White slope, sky, reflection. The plane kept moving forward, and everything the tourists thought was landscape became an obstacle. That is why the final photographs matter. The impact happened on the slope of Mount Erebus. Afterward, the discussion could no longer be only about pilots or only weather. The chain included route coordinates, information sharing, flight altitude, confidence in navigation, and the rare treachery of whiteout conditions. For the families, those words could not replace people. But for aviation, They became a painful lesson about changes to a route. If nature erases the horizon, a beautiful view becomes a threat. The passengers' photographs remain an almost unbearable document, with no panic. No panic, no warning, just a white window as final proof. Sometimes the troubling detail isn't dark or sharp, but too bright. In the next story, water will also look almost harmless. A thin trickle on concrete, mistaken for something smaller than what it really was. Story 28 begins with a wet stain on concrete. No roar, wave, or nighttime terror in the valley. Just a pale trickle on St. Francis Dam. At St. Francis Dam, in a dry California canyon, that detail stood out, but didn't alarm. Dams seep. Concrete gets damp. A caretaker notices the water. Engineers arrive, look, and discuss it. You can still convince yourself it is an ordinary leak. The dam is tall and new, the reservoir full, and Los Angeles needs water. It is important not to rush to simple blame. They saw a quiet sign with a plausible explanation. But such signs are most dangerous. They don't shout. They let an expert be confidently wrong. A dam holds water with more than concrete. It fights the earth below and beside it. On solid ground, its mass works as designed. But when the rock is weak, water searches for paths, presses into cracks, and softens what should have stayed as support. The St. Francis Dam was arch gravity, sending load into its own weight and canyon walls. On paper, it looked convincing. In a real canyon, everything depends on geology. Rock can vary from bank to bank. One slope holds, another yields. The system holds until the reservoir nears the top. Pressure rises coldly. Water pushes deeper and seeps harder. It stirred unseen forces. That trickle on concrete wasn't just water. Perhaps the foundation's language, read too lightly. The day before the failure, there really was an inspection. That makes the story heavier. They came, saw the leaks, and found an explanation. It did not require lowering the reservoir right away. Some wet marks were explained as normal seepage through cracks, with no sign of disaster. A visual inspection can be deceptive. It reassures you when things look familiar, but a dam may be failing below the surface. There was no window for the eye at the rock contact. That night, water pressed behind concrete in the dark. Below, people were living an ordinary evening, while something in the foundation was happening that no one could stop by looking. A dam doesn't fail like a door easing open. It holds shape, then gives way fast. Once the core cracked, time was gone. After midnight, the wall came apart, and the reservoir surged down the valley. Not like a burst pipe, but a huge mass carrying concrete debris. It carried trees, mud, and anything in its path. Small towns and farms sat below a mistake made higher up the canyon. Later photos showed huge pieces of the dam, bare slopes, and fresh waterline marks. Investigations kept returning to the foundation and bedrock. They examined the decision to raise the level, how cracks and leaks had been interpreted. Concrete seemed central, but weakness lay in the ground. That ground had been trusted to hold the concrete. The small, clear trickle was not the sole cause, only the visible clue to hidden trouble. Near the wall, danger isn't on it. Ahead, night, a train, and a bridge, outwardly intact, supports beaten by the river. Story 29 opens on Christmas night. No festivity, just train headlights, a black river, and a bridge. Tangiwai, in the dark, still appears intact. A passenger train crosses New Zealand's North Island, carrying holiday travelers. Some sleep. Others stare into dark windows reflecting the passenger car. The engineer sees the track in short fragments of light. Below the bridge, it isn't floodwater, but a volcanic lahar. Water, mud, stones, and silt, heavy as wet concrete. The most unsettling detail is almost invisible. The bridge may keep its silhouette, trusses standing, rails straight. Rails may look straight, but if the flow has torn away or undercut the supports, the bridge is a prop, not a bridge. The lahar begins far from the train.
On Mount Ruapehu, a crater lake is held back by a natural barrier of volcanic material. Mixed with snow, ice, and debris, it makes the danger seem locked above, until it breaks and water rushes down, not as a stream. It gathers ash, rocks, soil into a dense flow, scouring the riverbed. A normal river pushes. A lahar also cuts. It pounds supports with stones, undercuts foundations, and carries a mass that doesn't have to look high to be deadly. That night, the flow ran down the Fungayahu River toward Tongiwai Bridge. Once it struck the bridge, the train was only minutes away. The key was not years of decay, not a slow warning, but minutes when the structure still looked familiar as its support disappeared. One harrowing moment was the attempt to warn the train. People at the bridge saw something was wrong and tried to signal. In the dark, over the water's roar, headlights coming too fast made the warning a race against seconds. The engineer could see the light. He may have started braking, but a heavy passenger train, with its weight, inertia, passengers, and luggage, does not stop like a car. Ahead, the rails are still there, but the support beneath them is gone. The locomotive reaches the bridge, and the structure fails. The first cars plunge into dark water, unlike water. It pulls, slams, silts over windows, and twists metal. For seconds, he can't tell why the floor tilts. No distant warning comes. Disaster waits under the wheels. After Tangiwai, it was impossible to see a volcanic river as an ordinary river problem anymore. Warnings and crater lake monitoring were needed. A bridge on a volcanic route obeys not only railroad rules, but the mountains. A lahar doesn't check the schedule. It can strike at night, on a holiday, between routine inspections. Photos show the damaged bridge remained recognizable from above. From below, you see the current took the essential support. This isn't just about a train. Danger doesn't always break things in plain sight. It removes the support, and the first load reveals the truth. Dark water beneath was a warning, but the train reached it too late. Our final story leaves the rails for the sky, to a giant airship whose envelope showed creases before its last flight. Story number 30 begins with a photograph where the airship looks triumphant. A vast silver hull in a hangar, people in coats below. At its base were people in overcoats, searchlights on wet ground. R101 would prove Britain could build imperial-scale airships, but look beyond its size and at its skin. The image turns less triumphant, with ripples, folds, and soft sags in the fabric. To a viewer, it might just be texture. Something this large need not be perfectly smooth. To an engineer, that wrinkle asks a question. What happens to the stresses, airflow, and inner gas cells when rain and wind hit? An airship is no rigid-skinned airplane. Frame, gas, fabric tension, and vast surface area shape it. A small fold may be where the project starts whispering. A rigid airship is built like a building that has to fly. A metal frame, gas bags inside, an envelope outside, gondolas below. Engines, passenger compartments, fuel, people, and baggage all had to be light, strong, and obedient to the wind. R101's problem wasn't a part you could replace. Expectations grew. Range, prestige, comfort. Proof the state program worked. They lengthened, refined, and tested it. Fighting weight and lift as rain added mass, soaked fabric, and altered airflow. Each new revision needed time to test. But on grand symbolic projects, time behaves strangely. Always less than engineers need. There is always more time than politicians admit. The test flight starts looking like a demonstration, and demonstrations hate the word wait. Before its final flight, rain, wind, and a soaked skin made for a brutal night over England as the airship rose with people aboard. They trusted calculations, not romance. Yet in this machine, calculations met real fabric, seams, and water's weight on the surface. If the skin deformed, if the gas cells or outer cover worked differently than expected, the airflow began to press differently. As handling changed, Engines and rudders fought to regain altitude. Near France, R-101 hit worsening conditions and crashed. It wasn't one neat fairy tale cause. Investigators examined design, tests, weight, weather, and whether the aircraft was ready for a long flight. Yet the wrinkled photographs remain powerful, because they show the moment before. The giant craft already looked majestic, but not entirely calm. After R-101 crashed, Britain's passenger airship dream took a blow it barely recovered from. People died, including senior supporters of the program. With them collapsed the confidence that scale itself proved the technology was mature. The airship was too large to treat as a prototype, yet it was too untested to be treated as a reliable liner. That is the story's central tension. When a project becomes a symbol. Once it becomes a symbol, minor flaws hurt not just engineering, but reputation. You explain, delay, and hope they pass. Alone, they proved little, but recalled thousands of airship truths. Fabric, seams, rain load, lift reserve, an engineer's no. That time, the warning stayed in the photo. The answer came in the wreckage. Even giant machines signal disaster in tiny folds.